Welcome to our channel. Imagine a powerful, wealthy, and seemingly cold-hearted woman CEO who appears to have everything in her hands until one unexpected event pushes her to the edge of life and death. And then, fate steps in. She is saved by a man who seems ordinary on the outside, a single dad, carrying the weight of fatherhood while struggling to make ends meet. From that very moment, a unique bond is born. Between power and simplicity, between logic and heart, between a lonely CEO and a devoted single father. Throughout the 8 thrilling chapters of this story, you'll experience emotions ranging from nail-biting suspense, heart-fluttering romance, to heartfelt understanding and warmth. This is not just a surprising love story. It's a journey where two seemingly opposite lives find trust, strength, and true happiness together. Make sure to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss the upcoming episodes of this captivating series. We promise that every moment you spend watching will bring you excitement, drama, love, and maybe even a peaceful night's sleep once your heart has been filled with this sweet story. In a bustling city where everything seemed to move faster than the human heartbeat, there stood a glass skyscraper glittering in the sun like a giant diamond. At the very top of that tower, the office of the infamous CEO, dubbed by the media as the Ice Queen of Silvergate Corporation, shone like a throne above the clouds. Her name was Eleanor Carter, 36 years old, owner of a multi-billion-dollar Thuis tech empire. People said she could sign a pen stroke and make hundreds of jobs disappear within minutes. The press adored her as the icon of the modern woman, independent, razor-sharp, needing no man by her side. But what they never mentioned was this. Even the most powerful CEO can be so lonely that the sound of her heels echoing down an empty hallway felt like the only conversation left in her life. Elena never spoke about her childhood, yet anyone, observant, could see in her fierce eyes a thick layer of defense, much like medieval castles with deep moats and heavy iron gates. Castles were built to protect treasure. Elena's walls were built to protect a heart that had once been shattered. Her company ran on a merciless philosophy. Only results prove your worth. One employee once whispered, "Working for her is like running a marathon while smiling." Bitter words, but not wrong. In the modern capitalist world, kindness was often seen as a liability, while harshness became an asset. Elena knew this truth well. She became its living embodiment. And yet, there's a fascinating paradox in psychology. Those who crave control the most are often the ones who lose it most easily when faced with the unexpected. Elena never imagined that one day, she, the Ice Queen, would find herself in a situation no emergency meeting, no billion-dollar deal could save her from, and fate would place in her path a man who seemed to have nothing to do with her glittering world. A single dad. Elena Carter, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit and wearing eyes as cold as mirrors, walked into the Monday morning boardroom. A row of executives sat up straight like schoolchildren terrified of a pop quiz. "Quarterly revenue?" she asked. Short, clipped, not a syllable wasted. The CFO stammered through his report, the charts bleeding red far more than green. The room held its breath. Eleanor's glance at the numbers, her lips pressed together like a blade's edge, was enough to give a seasoned department head a week's worth of nightmares. People often say, the higher you climb, the thinner the air. Elena knew that better than anyone. The more successful she became, the fewer people truly stood beside her. After the meeting, she sat alone in her vast office, surrounded by glass walls overlooking the city. The headlights below looked like an emotionless river, just like her fleeting business relationships. Her phone buzzed. A message from her doctor. "Eleanor, it's time to rest. Prolonged stress will destroy your heart, both literally and figuratively." She let out a dry laugh. Her heart. That thing had broken long ago. But even as she thought that, she had no idea her so-called frozen heart was about to skip a beat, not for business, but for a man no one could have predicted. That man, at this very moment, was only a few blocks away. He knew nothing about Silvergate, nor did he care about stock tickers flashing on giant screens. His only worry was whether his daughter's worn winter coat would be warm enough when the cold winds returned. A single dad with calloused hands and eyes that carried both worry and tenderness, and fate, invisible but relentless, was already weaving the threads that would soon tie these two opposite worlds together. That evening, Eleanor left her office late, as usual. A sleek black limousine waited at the entrance, its door opening like the greeting of a privileged world. She stepped inside, her high heels clicking against the marble floor, each step like a rhythm composed of nothing but coldness and power. The car slid through the crowded streets, where people jostled into fast food shops and discount supermarkets. Elena rarely paid attention to such scenes. To her, the city was just a chessboard, and people were merely pieces moved by profit. But tonight, something unexpected caught her eye. A man in a worn coat holding tightly to the hand of a little girl as they crossed the chaotic street. The child looked up and laughed, her smile radiant as her father bent down to whisper something. The man's eyes, though tired, sparkled at the sound of her laughter. For a brief moment, Eleanor found herself drawn to that simple scene. No billion-dollar contracts, no charts, just two souls surviving because they had each other. "Madam, everything okay?" the driver asked through the rearview mirror. Eleanor blinked, quickly turning away. She didn't answer, just nodded slightly. Yet, inside her, something felt strangely touched. What she didn't know was that this very man would soon pull her life out of its cold, mechanical orbit. A single dad. And soon they would meet. Not through the glass of a limousine, but in a situation that would make her heart race faster than ever before. Night fell, and the city slipped into another skin, glittering yet full of traps. Elena had just left a charity gala, an extravagant event where champagne flowed like rivers and fake smiles gleamed brighter than crystal chandeliers. She was used to that kind of falseness, but tonight her body reacted differently. A sudden, sharp pain pierced her chest, making her steps falter in the underground parking lot. "Too much coffee," she muttered, forcing herself forward. But the pain only tightened, as if an invisible hand was crushing her heart. Around her, engines echoed, footsteps passed, but no one really noticed. To them, Elena was just another tall figure in an expensive gown, striding with pride. She staggered, clutching the wall. Her phone slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. In that moment, Elena felt the fragility of life, something no billion-dollar empire could ever secure. And then fate intervened. A voice rang out, not the polite tone of a receptionist, not her driver's formal voice, but something rougher, warmer, filled with concern. "Are you okay?" It was him, the man in the worn coat she had glimpsed through the limousine window, the single dad. He rushed forward, scooping her up as if her life mattered more than his own. And so, in the dark of an underground parking lot, the story began. A woman's CEO who seemed untouchable, saved by a man society too often overlooked. The last sounds Elena remembered before blacking out were hurried footsteps and a pounding heartbeat. She wasn't sure if it was hers or the man carrying her. When she awoke, the sharp smell of antiseptic and the blinding white lights told her she was in a hospital emergency room. Elena hated hospitals. They dragged her back to memories she longed to bury. Parents who were never around, a childhood spent in cold corridors, and doctors' warnings no one truly listened to. To Eleanor, hospitals were symbols of helplessness. And now, she, the CEO, who had made others tremble, was lying here, fragile and powerless like a child. The door opened, and the man in the worn coat stepped in. He was nothing like the men in her world. No Armani suits, no Rolex watches, just oil-stained hands and honest eyes, filled with both worry and warmth. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice raspy from rushing. Elena wanted to snap back with her usual cold reply, but her throat tightened. Instead, she just stared at him. Something strange stirred in her chest. For the first time in years, Someone had asked her a question that had nothing to do with contracts, shares, or profits. She was about to ask who he was when her eyes caught a small shadow in the hallway, a little girl clutching a worn teddy bear, peeking curiously inside. Elena blinked in surprise. A single dad? He hadn't just brought her to the hospital, he'd brought his daughter along. And in that moment, Elena Carter, the Ice Queen of Silvergate, felt the steel fortress around her heart begin to tremble. Eleanor blinked several times, catching her breath, before speaking in a raspy yet still commanding tone. "Who are you? And why? Am I here?" The man hesitated, then shrugged. "I'm not a doctor. I just happened to see you about to collapse in the parking lot. If I hadn't brought you here, you'd probably be tomorrow morning's headline." His voice was dry, but behind it lingered a spark of playful sarcasm. Elena frowned, both annoyed and intrigued. How long had it been since someone dared to talk to her without a trace of fear? She glanced at his hands, still rough and calloused, clearly from hard labor, something her corporate world often dismissed as another class. Yet his eyes never looked down. Instead, he met her gaze straight on, as if he didn't care whether she was a powerful CEO or just an exhausted woman. "You should have just called an ambulance and gone home," Eleanor said coldly. He chuckled softly. "Yeah, maybe. But think about it. If everyone only did the bare minimum, this world would be nothing but reports and contracts, with no room left for a simple act of kindness." Elena stayed silent. That simple remark somehow tightened her throat. In the hallway, the little girl still stood there, her curious eyes glowing. Elena glanced over and asked softly, "That your daughter?" The man nodded, a brief smile flickering across his face, warm enough to outshine every sterile hospital light. "Yeah, she's the only reason I'm still standing in this city." Eleanor turned her face away, as if hiding her reaction. Yet inside, a strange blend of curiosity and warmth began to stir. For the first time in years, she wasn't the one asking tough questions in a powerful interview. She was the one wanting to hear the story of a stranger. The door creaked softly open. This time, it wasn't the man who entered, but the little girl from the hallway. She looked about 8, her hair tied in a messy ponytail, sneakers worn thin but neatly kept. In her hand was a teddy bear, so old one ear was nearly torn off. Before Elena could speak, the girl whispered, "I'm sorry. I just wanted to make sure you're okay." The innocent words pierced straight through the ice fortress around Elena's heart. She let out a faint laugh, a rare smile, one that even surprised herself. "I'm fine. Thank you," Elena replied, her voice gentler than she ever expected it could sound. The girl tiptoed closer, placing the teddy bear on the bedside table. "I call him Mr. Teddy. When I'm scared, he always makes me feel safe. I thought maybe he could help you too." Elena was stunned. Never in her life had she received such a simple gift. She was used to contracts, extravagant presents, bouquets delivered on command. But here, a worn teddy bear from the hands of a child who had nothing but genuine kindness. "Mr. Teddy, huh?" Elena raised an eyebrow, masking her emotions with a hint of sarcasm. "Sounds very professional," the girl giggled, her eyes sparkling. And in that moment, Eleanor realized there were still things in this world money couldn't buy, things that could make her heart feel calmer than any profit margin ever could. At the doorway, the man leaned against the wall, arms crossed, quietly, watching. He didn't say a word, but his faint smile seemed to whisper, "That's right. Even CEOs need a Mr. Teddy." A knock on the door cut through the rare moment of warmth. The doctor entered, holding a thick folder, his face as stern, as if he were about to deliver a verdict. Instinctively, Eleanor straightened in bed. The CEO in her was always ready to receive news like she received deals, calm but tense. "Ms. Carter," the doctor began, his voice steady but cold. "Your tests show extreme stress levels. Your heart is already showing warning signs. If you continue at this pace, you face the risk of... He paused. Sudden cardiac death. The room fell silent. Elena let out a dry laugh, half sarcastic, half helpless. Sudden death, she repeated. So I could drop dead while signing a billion-dollar contract. Sounds dramatic enough. The man by the doorway frowned, his eyes flashing with anger and concern. Do you really treat your life like a joke? Eleanor was about to snap back, but the raw honesty in his gaze silenced her. She realized no board member, no shareholder had ever dared to speak to her like this. Only this man, a single dad with calloused hands, stood up to the Ice Queen and reminded her she was still human. She said nothing. The doctor nodded, set the file down, and left. The room held only 3 figures now: a powerful yet fragile CEO, a single father burdened with responsibility, and a little girl hugging Mr. Teddy, watching them with innocent eyes. That night, for the first time in years, Elena Carter couldn't sleep. Not because of quarterly profits, but because, for the first time, she was truly afraid for her own life. That night, as the hospital lights dimmed and the hallways echoed only with the quiet roll of a nurse's cart, Elena lay still, her eyes wide open against the sterile white ceiling. She hated that white. Too clean, too empty, like a blank page. No one bothered to write a story on. The doctor's words kept circling in her head. Sudden cardiac death. Those 3 words were colder than any loss report she'd ever read. People say wealth can buy everything, but in that moment, Elena felt desperately poor. Poor in time, poor in health, poor in peace of mind. She thought of the old sociological idea. Power and success are like climbing a tall ladder. The higher you go, the better the view, but the colder the wind and the harder the fall. Elena had climbed too high, too fast, never realizing what she'd left behind below. A soft knock on the door. Not the doctor, not a nurse. It was him, the man in the worn coat, walking in with a casualness that felt almost unreal. He set a paper cup on the bedside table. Coffee, he said. Cheapest kind from the vending machine downstairs. Tastes awful, but at least it's real. Elena let out a small laugh, the first in years not laced with sarcasm toward a rival. She picked up the cup, took a sip. Bitter, watery, nothing luxurious. Yet strangely, it felt real. What do you do for a living? She asked, curiosity, breaking through her usual walls. He looked at her for a moment, then replied, anything that keeps my daughter fed. Fixing cars, hauling boxes, odd jobs. I don't choose the work. I choose the responsibility. Eleanor stayed silent. Responsibility. The word rang in her mind like a distant bell, foreign yet familiar. She had always thought responsibility meant keeping her company running, stock prices up, her image untouchable. But maybe responsibility had another face, holding a child close and promising she would never go without. For the first time, Elena realized the scales of success she'd used her whole life might tell only half the story. And the other half, the half she had never touched, was sitting right in front of her, with calloused hands and honest eyes. Elena turned the paper cup in her hand, her sharp gaze returning. Even in a hospital bed, the CEO in her stirred. She wanted to read the man in front of her, the way she analyzed competitors in the boardroom. How old are you? She asked, half teasing, half serious. 38, he answered, without hesitation. Divorced? Yeah, if you want details. It ended faster than a probationary contract. Elena laughed. She hadn't expected him to joke about himself. In her world, men usually covered up their failures, wrapping themselves in polished illusions, but not him. He tossed the truth out as if it were nothing shameful. So, what's your average income? How do you plan to raise your daughter in this city? Elena pressed, her tone suddenly sharper, like a job interview. He raised an eyebrow. a brief smile crossing his face before he answered slowly. Do you know what a child needs most? Not a luxury apartment, not an elite school. What she needs is someone to sit beside her when she's afraid of the dark, and someone to hold her hand when she falls. I might not buy everything, but I'll never run short on that. Elena froze. For a moment, her sharp questions dissolved into meaninglessness. A CEO thought in numbers, charts, strategies. But for him, success was measured in small, raw, human moments. She leaned back against the pillow, silent. For the first time in years, Elena Carter felt like she was the one being interviewed. And worse, she realized she had lost, yet that loss felt strangely liberating. Outside the window, the city lights still gleamed. But this time, Elena no longer saw them as cold. The hospital room was quiet, the heart monitor beeping steadily. Elena thought the conversation was over when the door creaked open again. The little girl peeked in, clutching Mr. Teddy, her round eyes glowing. Can I sit with you for a while? She asked, her voice soft but full of courage. Elena froze for a second. In her life, requests always came with strings attached. Can we schedule a meeting to discuss a contract? Can we have dinner to talk? Partnership? But this was just a simple request from a child, with nothing but curiosity and kindness behind it. Yes, Elena replied briefly, though her tone was gentler than usual. The girl climbed onto the chair beside the bed, hugging her teddy bear, sitting upright as if she were attending a big board meeting. Elena let out a faint laugh, then asked, "What's your name?" "Emily," the girl answered quickly, then shot back her own question. "And you? I heard my dad call you Carter. That sounds like a superhero in movies. Do you have superpowers?" The innocent question made Elena pause. She had never thought of herself as having superpowers. If anything, her power was surviving 3 sleepless nights of work. She smiled bitterly. "No, I don't have superpowers. I just work and work and work." Emily tilted her head, her bright eyes sparkling. "But I think maybe your superpower is being strong. Strong enough not to cry when you're sad." Elena stiffened. The words cut deep, exposing a secret she had buried for years. Memories flooded back. Little Elena lying awake, waiting for parents who never came home. Even then, she had told herself, "Don't cry. Be strong." Elena turned her face away, pretending to adjust the blanket. Her voice trembled slightly. "Maybe you're right." Emily smiled, cheerfully pushing Mr. Teddy closer. "If you're ever sad, Mr. Teddy will listen. He's really good at keeping secrets." Elena accepted the bear, her fingers brushing the worn fabric. Warmth spread through her chest, a warmth she hadn't felt in years. The simple feeling of being cared for, not for power, not for profit, but simply because she was human. The next morning, Elena had barely closed her eyes after a sleepless night when the hospital phone buzzed insistently. She frowned and picked it up. On the screen were dozens of messages from her assistant. "The press knows you've been admitted. Reporters are gathering outside the hospital. The news is spreading online, and the company's stock is already fluctuating." Elena set the phone down, massaging her temples. She was used to headlines swirling around her like a storm, but this time was different. This wasn't about a deal, nor a speech. It was about her weakness. Outside the hallway, whispers grew louder. A nurse rushed in, flustered. "Reporters are trying to sneak in for photos. They want to know why the Ice Queen is in the ER." Elena inhaled deeply, her eyes turning cold again. "I'll handle them," she said, her CEO tone snapping, back into place. But before she could finish, another voice cut through, blunt, sharper than any boardroom rebuke. "You nearly died last night. Do you really want to die again just to protect an image?" The man in the worn coat stepped in, his gaze unexpectedly fierce. Elena froze. In her empire, no director, no shareholder had ever dared say that to her. But he, a single dad, did. Her hand clenched the bedsheet. She knew he was right. Yet for a CEO, admitting truth was harder than closing any billion-dollar negotiation. Outside, camera flashes popped like a pack of wolves circling. Inside, Eleanor Carter sat still, feeling for the first time caught between two worlds. The glittering empire she had built with blood and tears, and the fragile, honest moment she had just touched the night before, with a single dad and his daughter Emily, and she knew, soon, she would have to choose. The hospital, once quiet, had become a battlefield of media. Outside the gates, dozens of reporters crowded together, microphones raised high, camera flashes bursting like fireflies gone mad. On digital headlines, sensational titles spread like, "Wildfire! The Ice Queen rushed to the hospital." "Billion-dollar CEO Elena Carter, weaker than we thought." "Silvergate faces leadership crisis." Inside the room, Elena stared out the window, her eyes hard as steel but her heart tangled. She was used to facing the press at lavish conferences, with every answer polished by her PR team. But now, she had nothing, just wrinkled hospital clothes and a heart that might give out at any moment. "You don't need to go out there," the man said, leaning casually against the wall as if the storm outside had nothing to do with him. "They don't care if you live or die. They just want the story." Elena turned, her gaze still icy. "You don't understand. In my world, silence is more dangerous than words." He shrugged. "Maybe. But sometimes, being real is stronger than any press release." Elena said nothing. His words echoed inside her, like a crack in the fortress she had built around herself. Just then, Emily rushed in, breathless. "Daddy! They took pictures of me in the hallway. They asked if I was the daughter of someone important." Elena's chest tightened. In those innocent eyes, she saw a reflection of herself as a child, exposed, unprotected under the weight of curious stares. She looked at the man. He said nothing, just rested a hand on his daughter's shoulder, comforting her quietly. For the first time, Eleanor spoke words that surprised even herself. "I'll go out there. But this time, I don't want to go alone." The hospital doors swung open, and camera flashes exploded like fireworks. Reporters surged forward, microphones jostling, questions firing non-stop. "Elena Carter, rumors say you've suffered heart failure. Is that true? Is Silvergate searching for your replacement as CEO? Who is the man beside you?" Eleanor drew a deep breath. Dressed in wrinkled hospital scrubs, her hair loose and messy, she looked nothing like the Ice Queen the world knew. And yet, strangely, she felt lighter. For the first time, she wasn't hiding behind perfection. "Yes," she said, her voice ringing clear across the crowd. "I collapsed. I am not a machine. I have a heart. And that heart has sounded the alarm." The crowd hushed. Some reporters scribbled furiously, others froze in surprise. Elena went on, her tone lower, steadier. "You may be used to seeing me as a cold CEO, but today I want to remind you, no one is invincible. Success isn't about denying weakness, it's about daring to face it." Beside her, the man stood quietly, his eyes fixed on her, offering no words, but an unshakable presence. Emily clung to her father's leg, clutching Mr. Teddy, her wide eyes watching Elena as though seeing a hero step off the stage and into real life. A reporter called out quickly, "And the man with you, who is he?" Elena turned to him, a faint, unexpected smile tugging at her lips. "He," she said slowly, "is the one who reminded me that sometimes a simple act of kindness is stronger than a billion-dollar empire." Her words dropped like a stone into still water, rippling through the press pack. Flashbulbs erupted wildly, desperate to capture this rare moment when the Ice Queen admitted she was only human, no longer alone. Within hours, social media had erupted. The video of Elena's statement shot to the top of the trending list, shared everywhere with a storm of comments. One side praised her. "First time I've seen a CEO admit weakness. That's true courage. She's human, not a robot." I respect her honesty, but the other side sneered. Cold-hearted for years, now suddenly pretending to be weak to win sympathy. Silvergate is clearly in crisis. Investing now is gambling. In her hospital room, Eleanor scrolled through the comments on her iPad, each line cutting like a blade. She was no stranger to criticism, but this time was different. This time, her private life was laid bare. Worse, photos of Emily had surfaced, snapped secretly, splashed with headlines like, "Who is the mysterious little girl beside the powerful CEO?" Elena's chest tightened. She had always treated the media as a strategic game, but now the little girl with the teddy bear was being dragged into its cruelty. Just then, her phone buzzed. A call from Silvergate's board of directors. A cold voice echoed through the speaker. "Carter, the company needs answers. Stock has dropped 7% this morning alone. If this continues, we'll be forced to consider replacing you as CEO." Elena gripped the phone, fury rising inside her. She knew the board saw only numbers, never the woman who had nearly died the night before. That was the world she lived in. No one cared about pain, only about market value. She lifted her gaze, meeting the eyes of the man sitting quietly in the corner. He said nothing, but his steady look seemed to ask, would she keep hiding behind her empire, or finally face the truth and protect what mattered more than a billion-dollar company? Outside, public opinion was split in two. Inside, Elena's heart raced, not just from illness, but from the terrifying realization that, for the first time, she no longer controlled her own destiny. Elena sat in silence for a few seconds after the board's call. In her mind, two worlds pulled at her. On one side, Silvergate, the empire she had built with her youth. On the other, her own heart, freshly reminded of its fragility. She rose, tugging the IV stand along, and walked to the window. Noonlight streamed in, highlighting her weary face, but igniting a strange new brightness in her eyes. The man and Emily watched quietly, saying nothing. "Carter, what are you going to do?" Her assistant's anxious voice crackled through the phone. Elena drew a deep breath, her voice calm yet resolute. "Notify the press and the shareholders. Tomorrow, I'll hold a press conference right here at the hospital." There was stunned silence on the other end. "But that will crash the stock even further." "Maybe," Eleanor replied, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. "But at least this time, they'll hear me speak as a human being, not just a money-making machine." The room froze. The man gave the slightest smile, and Emily clapped her hands with delight, too young to grasp the weight of it all, yet sensing the courage. Outside, the flashes still sparked, the news still spun wild. But in that moment, Eleanor Carter, the Ice Queen, had made a decision that shocked the world: to strip off her flawless mask and face the public with nothing but her raw truth. And someone, a single dad, and his little girl, knew this choice would change everything. The next day, the hospital's ground floor turned into an impromptu stage. Dozens of reporters jostled for space, cameras mounted everywhere, bright lights glaring across the sterile room. Never before had a press conference been held in a place that still smelled of disinfectant and echoed with ambulance sirens outside. Elena appeared, not in designer gowns or a power suit, but in a pale blue hospital gown, layered with a simple cardigan Emily had handed her. Her hair loose, shadows under her eyes, but her stance was steady, resolute. The room fell silent. She stepped up to the podium. No prepared speech, no PR team. Her voice rang out, raspy but firm. "Today, you're not looking at a CEO. You're looking at a woman who nearly died just one night ago." A ripple of whispers spread. Cameras zoomed closer. Elena continued, "I've spent my life building Silvergate, but in doing so, I forgot one truth. A company can replace its CEO, but a child cannot replace a parent, and a heart cannot be replaced once it stops beating." In the back row, the single dad tightened his arm around his daughter. Emily looked up at Elena, her eyes glowing with awe. Elena paused, drew a deep breath and smiled. Not cold, but fragile. Human. I don't regret climbing to the top. But today, I must admit, even at the top, sometimes we need a hand to pull us back and remind us we're still human. The flashes went wild. A reporter shouted out, "Carter, are you referring to the man who saved you?" Elena's eyes swept the room, then stopped on him. For a moment, the world held its breath. She nodded softly. Yes. He reminded me that a single act of kindness can be stronger than a billion-dollar empire. The room erupted. Cameras clicked like a storm, and within minutes, global headlines screamed, "Ice Queen drops her mask, vulnerable, human." And a mysterious man. Just hours after the press conference, Eleanor's image was everywhere. News channels replayed her standing in a hospital gown, lit by flashing cameras, her voice steady, yet trembling. Public opinion split in two. One side praised her. For the first time, a CEO dared to stand up and admit her fears. Elena Carter turned weakness into strength. This is real leadership. The other side condemned, Silvergate stock has dropped 15% in 24 hours. This is the cost of a weak CEO. We don't need a sentimental woman. We need a leader of steel. At Silvergate headquarters, an emergency meeting raged through the night. Half the board demanded Elena's immediate removal to calm the markets. The other half, surprisingly, argued her honesty could mark a new era. A brand built on humanity, not just profit. Meanwhile, Elena sat quietly by the hospital window, watching the city lights. Neon still glowed, traffic still roared, stocks still jumped by the second. But for the first time in years, she no longer felt chained to those numbers. The man in the worn coat walked over, placing a cup of hot tea in her hands. "Tomorrow will bring another storm," he said calmly. Elena nodded, her eyes still on the streets below. Then she smiled, a smile as light as the breeze. "At least today, I spoke in my own voice. And you know, it feels freer than any billion-dollar contract ever could." Emily, curled up with Mr. Teddy, looked up innocently and asked, "What does freedom mean, Miss Carter?" Eleanor bent down, brushing a hand through the girl's hair, whispering, "Freedom is when you can be yourself, without fear of being laughed at." And in that moment, Eleanor's heart felt lighter than it had in years. The storm outside raged on, but inside she felt truly alive, for the very first time. At Silvergate's glass headquarters, the lights blazed all night like a battlefield. The board sat around the long table, tension etched into every face. "Carter has lost control," one director barked, slamming his fist down. 15% stock drop, and she's out there talking about freedom. This isn't a TED Talk. This is a billion-dollar company. Another countered sharply. But the public is talking about Silvergate more than ever. Her honesty could be a chance to rebrand from a cold machine to a company tied to humanity. The arguments clashed on, chairs scraping, voices rising. Yet one truth lingered. Elena's future as CEO was no longer secure. In the shadowed corner of the room, a man in a black suit sat quietly. Marcus, the CFO, notorious for his ambition, long dreaming of the CEO's chair. His eyes, sharp as blades, flicked across the blood-red stock charts on the screen. His lips curled in a thin smile. "This is the moment," he whispered to his aide. "A queen is wobbling, and when the throne is empty, someone else will sit on it." Meanwhile, Elena remained at the hospital, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing beneath her feet. She listened as Emily chattered about school, her smile softening, her eyes lighter than they had been in years. The man in the worn coat sat close, silent, but his gaze stayed sharp. He knew. Every fragile smile on Eleanor's face was already threatened by a battle she had yet to see. The next morning, before the sun could burn away the mist, a shocking headline dominated the front page of the nation's top financial paper. The words cut like a knife. "Silvergate in crisis. CEO Carter hid heart condition for years. The article cited internal sources, claiming Elena had long known of her illness, yet pushed herself to work, deliberately keeping shareholders in the dark. Cold, sharp words that turned yesterday's sympathy into today's suspicion. On social media, the tide shifted. If true, she betrayed investor trust. This is no different from fraud. She's not a leader. She's a ticking time bomb. At Silvergate, Marcus sat in his office, his eyes glued to the screen, cold and calculating. He knew exactly who the internal source was. A thin smile curled his lips. The move is made. Now I just have to watch the pieces fall. Back at the hospital, Elena read the article on her iPad, her face stiffening, not from fear, but from realization. The game of power had begun, and this time, the enemy wasn't the press. It was her own board. "You okay?" the man in the worn coat asked, concern in his eyes. Elena stayed silent for a long moment, then gave a faint, bitter smile. "Looks like I've officially stepped into a new war. But you know, I've fought too many wars already. The difference is, maybe, this time I won't be fighting alone." He nodded slightly, while Emily clutched Mr. Teddy tighter and whispered, "Miss Carter will win, right, Daddy?" The man glanced at Eleanor and answered softly, "I don't know about winning or losing, but I do know she won't be alone anymore." And, in Elena's eyes for the first time, there was not just the pride of a CEO, but the flicker of something stronger than numbers and contracts, faith in people. Elena sat at the hospital desk, a laptop open before her, just delivered by her assistant. Emails from shareholders poured in, demands for explanations, threats of lawsuits, even outright insults. Each line cut deep into the pride of a CEO once thought untouchable. She closed her eyes. In her mind echoed the mocking laughter of the press, the venomous chatter of social media, and above all, Marcus's cold voice. A queen is wobbling, and when the throne is empty, someone else will sit on it. But this time, Elena didn't tremble. She opened her eyes, sharp and steady as a beam of light piercing fog. "Fine. If they want war, I'll give them one, but not the old way." The man in the worn coat frowned. "What are you going to do? Fight them with numbers, the very thing they know best?" Elena shook her head, a defiant smile curving her lips. "No, I'll fight with truth. Marcus thinks I'm weak because of my illness, but the very weakness, I admitted, could be my strongest weapon. When people see me as one of them, they won't let a greedy man steal the throne." He studied her for a long moment, then chuckled softly. "Miss Carter, for the first time I believe you're not just the Ice Queen. You're a fighter." Eleanor turned back to the screen and began typing. But this time, it wasn't sterile corporate statements. She wrote with honesty about the heart attack, about the night she almost died, about Emily and Mr. Teddy. No longer hiding behind steel walls, she chose to appear as flesh and blood. "In business," she murmured, "they taught me weakness is a death sentence. But maybe truth is the thing that makes us immortal." Outside, the city roared in chaos, but in that quiet hospital room, a new strategy was forming, one Marcus never saw coming. Eleanor Carter, the Ice Queen, would strike back not with power, but with heart. The next morning, while the stock market bled red and the media feasted on Elena's health crisis, an unexpected announcement appeared on Silvergate's official website and social media channels. It wasn't a dry PR statement. It wasn't a wall of numbers to calm investors. It was a personal letter, signed by Elena Carter herself, addressed to the world. "I am Elena Carter. Yes, I hid my condition, not because I wanted to deceive shareholders, but because I deceived myself, believing I was a machine that could run forever without breaking. The truth is, I collapsed. I was weak. But I believe weakness is not failure. It is a reminder that we are all human. Silvergate was not built on contracts and numbers alone. It was built on people, the engineers, the staff, their families. And I, more than anyone, must be the first to admit that. If you want to fire me for being honest, do it. But if you believe true courage is daring to be real, then I will keep fighting, not just for this company, but for everyone who believes humanity and profit can coexist. The letter ended. No pleading, no defense. Just a declaration. By mid-morning, headlines blazed across the world. Elena Carter, the CEO who turned weakness into a weapon. From her hospital bed, the Ice Queen sends a message that shakes Wall Street. On social media, millions of shares spread, with hashtags like We Stand With Elena and Human CEO trending. For the first time, many admitted they saw a CEO who felt real, not just a polished machine. At Silvergate headquarters, Marcus slammed the newspaper onto his desk. He hadn't expected Elena to flip the board so quickly. "Damn it! She's turning weakness into armor," he growled. Back at the hospital, Elena closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair. The man in the worn coat looked at her, smiling faintly. "You just reminded the world that even queens have hearts, and maybe that's what makes you truly unbeatable." Elena said nothing, but her eyes held a light, not of power, but of belief. Just days after Elena's letter shook the world, while hashtags like Chapachi Human CEO still trended, another leak hit a major financial news channel. This time, it wasn't about her heart condition. It was about her past. Insider: Elena Carter abandoned her family in pursuit of power. The report showed images of a shabby old house in the suburbs, interviewing former neighbors. An old woman shook her head. She was a smart girl, but too ambitious. Her parents were sick, and she rarely came back to visit. The media exploded. Headlines screamed, "Human CEO or daughter without a heart." She speaks of heart, but whose heart does she truly care about? In the hospital room, Eleanor stared at the screen. Her hand trembled, not from anger, but from memories, ripped open. She saw her childhood again. Endless fights between her parents, her mother ill, little Eleanor burying herself in books at the library, swearing she'd escape poverty and helplessness. "This is Marcus's move," the man in the worn coat said grimly. "He doesn't just want the CEO's chair. He wants to destroy you as a person." Eleanor bit her lip, a sting pressing into her chest. She had never told anyone. She hadn't abandoned her family. She had simply lacked the strength to face the collapse. But to the press, truth was always sliced and reshaped into the story that sold best. Emily clutched Mr. Teddy, looking at Elena with wide, worried eyes. "Miss Carter, they're lying about you, aren't they?" Elena lifted, her gaze meeting those innocent eyes. She smiled faintly, though her own eyes glistened. "Sometimes, Emily, people don't care what the truth is. They only care which story sells better." The man tightened his fists, locking eyes with her. "So what now? Do you step back, or do you tell your own story?" Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, then opened them with fire. "No. This time I'll tell it myself. Marcus will learn that the past isn't my shackle. It's the reason I am who I am today." That night, an unexpected announcement hit every major network. Silvergate CEO Elena Carter to speak live from hospital. On screen, Elena sat in a chair, her hair still messy, dark circles under her eyes. No stage lights, no sleek backdrop, just a plain hospital room. But that raw simplicity glued millions of viewers to their screens. Elena began, her voice low and steady. "Stories are spreading about my past. They say I abandoned my family, that I was cold, caring only for power. Tonight I want to tell the story myself, not to excuse, but to explain why I chose this path." She paused, her gaze turning distant. "I grew up in a house full of arguments. My parents fought nearly every day. My mother was sick, and I, a child, had no way to cope except burying myself in books. Yes, I rarely came home, not because I didn't love them, but because I was afraid of facing helplessness. I swore I'd escape poverty and weakness, and I did. But the price was years I can never get back. Her voice trembled, but she didn't flinch. I am not proud of that. But I am not ashamed either, because those scars made me who I am today. A CEO, a woman unafraid to admit she is not perfect. The studio fell silent. Viewers across the world held their breath. Then, Elena looked straight into the camera. Marcus and anyone else can dig up my past, but they will never erase this truth. I fell, I failed, and that made me stronger. If you want a perfect leader, that's not me. But if you want an honest one, I'm still here. In that moment, the broadcast exploded online. Comments flooded. She's truly brave. First time I've seen a CEO confront her past head-on. Marcus, who's the cold one now? At Silvergate HQ, Marcus hurled his glass to the floor, shards scattering across the room, drowning out the TV. He hadn't expected Eleanor to turn a fatal strike into a counterattack. Meanwhile, in the hospital, the man in the worn coat placed a hand on Elena's shoulder, whispering, "You just reminded the world that scars aren't weakness. They're proof you survived." Elena smiled, and for the first time, that smile hid nothing, only truth. The morning after her live broadcast, the business world erupted. Major newspapers ran headlines across their front pages. Elena Carter, the CEO who faced her past. The Ice Queen melts, honesty as the new strength. Silvergate's stock, after its brutal fall, suddenly steadied and even ticked upward. A small signal, but enough to prove public faith wasn't gone. Inside Silvergate, though, things were far from calm. The board had split into two clear camps: Marcus's faction, demanding a stable leader, cold, unshaken, and untouched by emotion. Eleanor's supporters, speaking up publicly for the first time, insisting humanity was the new era and Silvergate could become a model if Elena stayed. The meeting was tight as a drawn bowstring, every word a hidden blade behind a smile. Marcus sat at the head, eyes glittering with calculation, fingers tapping the table like a predator waiting for prey. Meanwhile, outside, an unexpected wave surged. Thousands of social media users launched the hashtag #StandWithElena, sharing their own stories of weakness, illness, and survival. News stations invited other CEOs to comment. One of Elena's fiercest former rivals admitted on air, "Elena Carter has done what few CEOs dare. She turned truth into strength. I may not be her ally, but I respect her." In her hospital room, Elena read the stories, her eyes misting. Not with sadness, but with something lighter. The man in the worn coat placed a hand on her shoulder, half teasing. "Looks like you're becoming a symbol. Not just a CEO, but what? Some kind of human hero." Eleanor laughed softly, a rare sound of relief. "Hero, I don't know, but for the first time, I don't feel alone against the world." She turned to Emily, who was scribbling with coloured pencils. On the paper, the girl had drawn a woman in a cape beside a little girl holding Mr. Teddy. Beneath it, Emily had written, in crooked letters, "Super Carter." Elena stared at it, silent for a long while. Then whispered, "Maybe. I have to fight. Not just for the company, but for her, and for every pair of eyes that now believes in me." While the world outside rallied behind Fasham's stand with Elena, Marcus quietly moved his decisive piece inside Silvergate. An emergency board meeting convened on the 42nd floor. No more meandering debates. Marcus rose, voice calm, but eyes burning. "We cannot go on like this. The company needs a definitive choice. I propose an immediate vote. Retain or remove Elena Carter as CEO." The room erupted. Some gasped. Others nodded as if they had awaited this moment. One member shot back, "Carter has generated positive brand impact. Stock is recovering. Public support is strong. Removing her now would be suicide." Marcus smirked coldly. "Public opinion doesn't stabilize companies. We need control. And remember, our duty is not to please the crowd, but to protect shareholder interests." The air crackled with tension. Finally, the chairman, an aging man with a cautious face, struck his gavel. Very well. The vote will take place within 72 hours. The result will be final. Those who support Carter and those who oppose, prepare yourselves. The news leaked within hours. Headlines blazed. Silvergate to oust Eleanor Carter. A life or death vote for the human CEO. In her hospital room, Eleanor read the email in silence. For a long moment she sat still, then lifted her head, her face no longer stunned but steeled with resolve. Marcus wants war. Then he'll have one, she said firmly. The man in the worn coat smiled faintly. Got a plan already? Eleanor's lips curved into a determined smirk. Yes. I won't sway them with power. I'll sway them with humanity. Emily, hugging Mr. Teddy, piped up innocently. Does that mean you'll tell a true story again? Eleanor smiled, brushing her hair. Yes, Emily. And this time, I'll tell it to all of Silvergate. 72 hours before the vote, the hospital became a war room. Eleanor, still hooked to an IV, carried eyes blazing with resolve. Instead of hiding behind assistants or thick reports, she chose to meet each board member face to face. The first was Mrs. Ramirez, the HR director, a woman who had often clashed with Elena over her icy management style. Entering the hospital room, Ramirez frowned. Carter, I thought you'd come armed with numbers. Don't tell me you plan to use emotions. Eleanor gave a faint smile. No. I'll use truth. I once thought employees were just figures on a report. But the night I collapsed, the person who saved me wasn't a private doctor or a bodyguard. It was a single dad. One of those people society barely notices. He reminded me that this company doesn't exist because of stock prices. It exists because of the people who live under Silvergate's roof. Ramirez froze for a moment, her eyes softening. She gave a slight nod without a word, but Eleanor knew she had planted a seed. Next was Mr. Tanaka, the technology chief, known for his ruthless pragmatism. He eyed Eleanor sharply. Carter, I don't care about your past or your tears. I care if you can keep this company standing. Elena answered firmly. You're right. I can't promise Silvergate won't face storms, but I can promise I won't abandon the people steering this ship through them. And because of that, they'll fight for Silvergate, not just for a paycheck, but for belief. Tanaka didn't smile, but slowly nodded. And so it went, one conversation after another. No promises of soaring profits, no cold handshakes. Elena appeared as she was, scarred, flawed, but with the strength to rise again. On the final night before the vote, she sat by the hospital window, gazing at the city lights. The man in the worn coat approached, resting a hand on her shoulder. You did what Marcus never could. Looked every person in the eye and spoke with your heart. I think this time you have a real chance. Eleanor smiled softly, though her eyes remained distant. Chance isn't enough. I need to turn it into belief, because only belief can defeat fear. Voting day. The 42nd floor of Silvergate was sealed, off. Reporters crowded the lobby, camera flashes exploding like fireworks. Live feeds updated by the minute. Today, Silvergate decides the fate of CEO Elena Carter. Historic vote, humanity versus power. Inside the boardroom, the air was thick, heavy enough to cut. Marcus sat at the head of the table, adjusting, his tie, his face radiating smug confidence. He had lobbied relentlessly, certain half the votes were already in his pocket. The doors swung open. Elena entered. She wore no power suit, just a simple dark dress, her hair loose. Fatigue still lingered on her face, but her eyes burned bright. The room fell silent. Her presence, fragile yet defiant, made glances shift uneasily. She sat down, placing her hands on the table. No speech notes, no PowerPoint. Her voice rang out, slow but unshakable. Before you cast your votes, let me say this. I am not here to keep a chair. I am here to keep Silvergate's soul. Whispers rippled. Across the room, Marcus smirked, though a flicker of irritation crossed his eyes. Elena went on. You can choose Marcus, who promises stability. But remember, stability has never built the future. The future belongs to courage, to change. And I believe Silvergate is more than a company. It is proof that profit and humanity can walk together. Ramirez lowered her gaze, thoughtful. Tanaka folded his arms, his sharp eyes strangely glinting with agreement. The chairman struck the gavel. It is time. Prepare to vote. Marcus leaned back, his smug smile returning. Elena tightened her grip on the table, taking a deep breath. Outside the glass windows, the late afternoon sun streamed in, landing squarely on her, as if reminding her that whatever the outcome, the truth she planted had already begun to grow. The room bristled with unbearable tension. Ballots were about to be cast, and Elena Carter, with all her scars, her weakness, and her strength, was ready to face her fate. The room was drowned in silence. Each ballot slipped into the box, the rustle of paper sounding like war drums. No one dared to breathe too loudly. Outside, hundreds of reporters waited, live streams running, the whole world watching. The chairman slowly opened the envelopes, pulling out one ballot after another. His aged face was stern, like a judge delivering sentence. Retain Eleanor Carter. The first ballot. Remove Eleanor Carter. The second. And so it went, each word slicing through the air like a blade. Elena sat motionless. Every time her name was paired with retain or remove, her chest tightened. Across the table, Marcus leaned back, a smug smile spreading as if victory was already his. At last, the final count was in. The chairman paused, eyes sweeping over the room. Elena, Marcus, then the rest. The tension was unbearable. 11 votes to retain, 10 votes to remove, he declared. Elena Carter will remain CEO of Silvergate. The room erupted. Elena's supporters exhaled in relief, some smiling faintly. Marcus slammed his hand against the table, face flushed with fury, but powerless. Outside, headlines blazed instantly. Elena Carter survives, CEO death vote. The Ice Queen wins. With heart? Eleanor drew a deep breath, her eyes shimmering. She knew how fragile this victory was. Only a single vote stood between survival and downfall. But that fragility revealed a deeper truth. Power didn't come, only from numbers, but from belief. She rose, locking eyes with Marcus. Her voice was calm, but sharp as steel. You're right. This was a war. And today, I won. Not with coldness, but with truth. And that's something you'll never have. Marcus clenched his fists, eyes blazing. He hadn't lost completely, but for the first time he realized his enemy couldn't be crushed with schemes alone. Through the glass doors, Eleanor saw the man in the worn coat and Emily waiting. Emily lifted Mr. Teddy high, shouting, "Miss, Carter won!" Eleanor laughed, the brightest laugh since the storm began. And in that moment she knew. This victory wasn't just about keeping her title, it was about something far greater. The chance to live true to herself. After the fateful vote, Eleanor walked out of Silvergate headquarters, surrounded by reporters. Flashes exploded, microphones thrust toward her, but this time her face was calm. She walked slowly, steadily, her eyes carrying a rare lightness. In the crowd, she spotted a familiar figure. The man in the worn coat stood quietly, like a steadfast shadow. Emily ran forward, grabbing Elena's hand, lifting Mr. Teddy, high like a banner of victory. Elena crouched down to meet the girl's eyes, smiling softly. "Thank you, Emily. Today, without you, I might not have had the courage to stand tall." The little girl beamed. "But you're way stronger than I thought, Miss Carter." The man stepped closer, his gaze meeting Elena's. Between them stretched a silence, brief yet deeper than 1,000 words. It was no longer the look between a CEO and a stranger, but between two people who had known loss, faced weakness, and found strength in each other. Elena spoke, her voice low yet tender. "You know, for the first time in years, I don't want to fight alone anymore." He gave a faint, rare smile. "Then don't. The world's cold enough as it is. Sometimes, we just need someone beside us to remind us we're still human." Eleanor let out a soft laugh, fragile yet genuine. A quiet admission that beneath the armor, she was still a woman longing for love. On the ride back to the hospital, she leaned her head against the car window. The city outside still blazed, roaring with endless motion. But inside her heart, for the first time, it wasn't just about numbers, contracts, or political wars. A gentler question whispered through her mind. Could this be the beginning of a new chapter, not just for CEO Carter, but for Elena, a woman, a heart, and maybe a love? That evening, instead of returning to her glittering penthouse, Elena accepted an invitation to the man and Emily's small apartment. Barely 700 square feet, the place sat in a modest neighborhood. The ceiling was low, the walls a bit worn, but warmth filled every corner. Emily's drawings taped across the fridge, the faint smell of chicken soup from the kitchen, a scratched wooden table covered with an old but clean cloth. "Miss Carter, sit here," Emily said politely, pulling out a chair like a tiny hostess. Elena sat, slightly awkward. She was used to million-dollar banquets, fine wines, polished silverware. But here were just 3 bowls of soup, a plate of stir-fried greens, and crisp toasted bread. Strangely, her heart softened. The man ladled soup, speaking calmly. "This isn't a fancy dinner, but it's the best I can make after a long day." Eleanor smiled, murmuring almost to herself, "Maybe this is what a real dinner feels like." Emily chattered away about school, how she scored a 10 on her math test, how her teacher praised her drawing. Elena listened, smiling, and felt something odd, something she hadn't felt in years, the warmth of sitting in a home, not as a CEO, but simply as a person. As the meal wound down, Emily suddenly perked up. "Miss Carter, do you want to play our wish game? Daddy and I do it every night. Everyone says one wish before bed." Eleanor blinked in surprise, then nodded. Emily shut her eyes tight. "I wish Mr. Teddy will always hear all my secrets." Laughter filled the table. The man shook his head, then said quietly, "I wish tomorrow I'll have enough strength to be a good father." Elena fell silent. No one had asked her for a wish in years. At last she whispered, "I wish tomorrow I'll still have the courage to live like today, not as a CEO, not as the Ice Queen, just as Elena." In that moment, their eyes met. No longer CEO and single dad, no longer power and ordinary life. Just 2 people. A woman once shackled by glory and a man once shackled by duty, learning how to find themselves again. Outside, the city roared, but inside that little apartment, a rare peace took root, the seed of something greater than power or ambition, love. A week later, Elena returned to Silvergate headquarters. She was no longer the trembling woman in a hospital bed, nor the arrogant Ice Queen of old. Her steps were steady, her figure light, her smile just enough to make every gaze bow. At the official press conference after surviving the vote, Elena declared, "Silvergate is entering a new era, where profit walks with responsibility, where numbers stand alongside people. And I, Elena Carter, promise to lead not only with my mind, but with my heart." The hall erupted in applause. Yet, as she left the stage, what lingered in her mind wasn't the flashes or the praise. It was Emily, holding Mr. Teddy high from the audience, grinning wide. "Go, Miss Carter." That night, Eleanor didn't return to her penthouse. She went back to the small apartment, where the smell of chicken soup and the sound of childlike laughter felt more precious than any billion-dollar deal. She sat beside the man in the worn coat, both of them quietly watching Emily asleep on the sofa, clutching Mr. Teddy tight. "You know," Eleanor whispered, "I spent my whole life chasing power, but it turns out what I needed most was a home." He turned, his gaze soft. "Then stay, not as a CEO, as Elena." In that moment, her heart felt weightless. Not because she had won a boardroom war, but because, for the first time, she allowed herself to love and to live as a human being. Outside, the city blazed on, restless as ever. But inside that small apartment, time slowed, leaving only peace. And Elena knew. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one of a human CEO, a woman, in love, and a warm little family.